Okay, so um, hey everyone, thank you for joining this panel. I think we can do one round of introduction just to get to know each other. So I'm Luca. I'm head of research at L2Beat. I've been there for more than 3 years. I've been, looking into these L2s for a very long time and very closely since the very beginning. And yeah.
Hey, Luca. I'm Ben. I'm the DevRel lead at the Arbitrum Foundation, which supports Arbitrum.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul. I'm leading the blockchain team over at Zello. I've been there for 4 years now, and yeah, basically been part of the migration from becoming an L1 to becoming an L2.
Yeah, and I'm Igor. I'm the CTO of Gateway, and we are one of the early RAS and in general blockchain infrastructure player in the space.
Thank you. So I wanted to start this conversation with exactly what Adrian said. So I remember when I started looking into L2s, and even before L2s, with all the discussion on plasma and state channels. At that time, I feel like people tend to forget that the situation on Ethereum, like transacting on Ethereum, was very bad, right? Transactions were costing $50, $100, $200. I remember there was this famous website that was showing you the amount of ETH that you spent on gas fees, and I think I'm well over 10 ETH myself. And they even did an airdrop at some point. But the situation was very bad. Like even before 1559, the base fee, it was taking several blocks to get your transaction included, even if it was well priced. And back then, there was a very big need to solve this issue, right? So, and from one direction, from the Ethereum Foundation, if you remember, Vitalik discussing these topics, his idea was basically, his vision was basically that L1 will always be expensive. It will be always expensive. It will get even more expensive. No one will afford to transact on L1 except maybe rollups with proofs or very high value transactions. And this is why we need to rely on L2s to scale, right? And all the L2s at the very beginning, I think about Optimism, Arbitrum, what they were trying to do, was we want to be exactly Ethereum, the same experience, that you get on Ethereum, but cheaper and faster, right? And now, my belief is that we kind of pivoted out of this. And one reason why we did this is because no L2 managed to actually get trust minimized, right? The idea was to scale these trustless or trust minimized block space, but all the L2s have Security Council, and after many years we didn't manage to get that far because it's difficult, right? I think also because the L2s are not really maximally prioritizing that. So now Ethereum pivoted. We say, okay, they cannot provide us with this decentralized block space. Ethereum is going to scale by itself. We're working on the next upgrades. I think within the next one, we're going to increase the gas limit by 4, 5x, which is huge. Gas fees are already very low. We're already thinking about lowering block times. So now the question is for you, given the original vision, of L2s, how do you see yourself in this space?
I appreciate a very easy question as the first question to start our conversation with. Let's go light first, right? That's nothing like a good warm-up. I actually think the question itself, I dispute the premise a bit of the very question, which is I think we're conflating the solution that was offered in a moment and the purpose of a thing. And I think sometimes we see a solution implementation detail, and therefore we understand that to be why the thing was created. And I'm going to take one step back, and I'm going to turn your question into another question, which was, why was Arbitrum created not calling itself by what type of rollup it was? So in the beginning, as one of the early rollups, right, you could choose to call yourself by the technology you're using. the type of proving, the type of stack, something. And there are rollups that have done that and do that. They call themselves by what kind of proving they are, ZK, optimistic, whatever. But Arbitrum chose a really kind of weird name, which is hard to pronounce sometimes, and you see it mistyped often, and it's, even years later, people don't really understand what it is. And I think that was actually not a branding decision, and maybe it would have been a bad branding decision, actually. But I think it was something a little deeper, which is that the entire modus operandi, or the raison d'etre of why Arbitrum was created was to solve the problems of users of block space. And so in the beginning, the problems of users of block space was speed and scalability and affordability. That those problems still exist today, but Ethereum is amazingly helping to, on the L1 level, address many of those things at this point, and I think that's great and beautiful. But at the same time, that doesn't solve all institutional, organizational, business, and consumer problems of using as consumers of block space. And so that, I think, is the raison d'etre of Arbitrum, to solve the problems of using block space well. And so initially it was affordability, to be cheap and to be fast. And I think we are still cheap and we're fast, and that's great. But we also need to think about things like differentiated block space, opinionated block space that balances between principles and pragmatism, block space that offers a developer experience that can be scalable to the needs of enterprise use cases, and like a whole sort of things. I'm going to stop talking because I could talk about it for a long time, but I think that is the challenge, and that was the premise by which Arbitrum was created. And in that framing, I don't think we're anywhere near a conclusion of like a finality of reaching a utopia in any way. Anyone who is, I'm a very active user of blockchains, and I'm sure you are also, like all the time transacting personally. It is not solved on any of these ways. And so I think that the struggle is still ahead of us, both in the consumer level, on the enterprise level, on the institutional level, and I think in that way, L2s and every other aspect of the stack have a lot of work set out for them, even as Ethereum amazingly takes on some of the responsibilities of making it affordable and scalable, which is great, but that doesn't solve all the other issues.
Can I ask you like a quick question? I didn't fully get your thing about names. Like, yeah. To me, Arbitrum comes from the arbitration protocol, like the challenge protocol, right? Isn't it?
It's a good interpretation.
Isn't that the reason?
I think, just so they catch the camera, I think there's authorial intent, right? And then there's many different ways of understanding a name. And I think the very fact that it is an obscure name and it could lend itself to that understanding is great. But I'm not here to say that that is what the name exactly 100% means in an authorial perspective. It would have been a lot easier to just call ourselves something a lot simpler. But we didn't do that. And I'm not making this up, by the way. Like, this was, I heard this in a conversation with Ed Felton, who said a very similar thing when I was like, I was blown away by that. I'm only been at Arbitrum for less than 2 years. But this was Ed's understanding of how Arbitrum came to be, and so that's like that's firsthand account, right? That's the authorial account of the person one of the people who was there at the genesis point. But yeah, good question.
Yeah, I can also add a little bit. I totally agree, but I think if we look at this Ethereum what's kind of the selling point of Ethereum itself, right? A lot of big selling points of this is neutrality, and then permissionlessness, and this is like a big points, like if you compare it to like permissioned and opinionated systems. But like if the neutrality, performance, and permissionlessness was everything we need for actual customer use cases, we would have like a global adoption already of everything, right? But we don't. And that means that there is definitely a niche, an important niche, I think, for, again, opinionated and very like non-neutral and permissioned systems, like for, again, just for from the legislation, compliance standpoint, like anything, like how do you transact and don't basically make each other in trouble on these things. And that's, I think, where the kind of the next step of development of L2s as well. Also performance-wise, again, there are still some use cases where being fast and cheap is very, very important, where you can basically bring like experience again, like card payments, where you cannot wait for 12 seconds or even for 3 seconds blocks. You need to answer way under 1 second or something like this. So yeah, these are definitely the use cases that are still there for L2s, and I think evolving in this and the base L1 network becoming like and doubling down on these properties instead of trying to dilute itself is even better.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think my answer for L2s would be that L2s can also be like a proving ground. I think Ethereum is really good as simulating like use cases. Take DA, they were like more specialized providers, and I think they can't be replaced completely. But I think Ethereum is really good at like taking the big markets and like merging them into a more stable and slower moving tech. And I would say that, yeah, we need more opinionated L2s. So like someone just spinning up a chain, which probably takes less than a day, even if you're not experienced, is not gonna have a future. But like chains that have like more specific use cases and that add specifics that help that use case are the future. And maybe L2s that can, yeah, try out things. I mean, if we're looking at interop now, there's a lot of people, it's a big problem for L2s. And I think there's a lot of different ideas on how L2s can solve that. And yeah, different L2s try different approaches. And I think in the end, there's gonna be some tech that, yeah, is gonna win or is gonna get integrated into Ethereum core. And that's probably gonna be the one that's gonna be used for most of the use cases.
Okay, so I'll try to challenge you a little bit more. So yesterday there was a panel with Vitalik at DAppCon, and he was asked like if he sees like what are the use cases basically for the L2, so like what buckets he sees, what categories of these chains that are connected to Ethereum, and his answer was like, privacy chains, because we're talking about specialization, right? And of course, there is a need to be more scalable than Ethereum and faster than Ethereum. This is not a solved problem. Ethereum is not scalable and fast today. It will be, but the question was again, seeing 10 years in the future, right? So ignoring scalability and being cheap. Also because Ethereum is becoming itself an L2 with the zkVM efforts. So just regarding specialization, Vitalik's answer was privacy. He mentioned like Intmax and Aztec as the two privacy L2s out there. Another one was very specialized use cases like perps. We have Lighter, that is an app-specific L2, and they do it very well. They're very fast. They do 2,000-3,000 transactions per second. They're super cheap because they optimize the way that they post data on L1. And then he mentioned, like some more experimental things, right? Like his idea of specialization, I think, is like super specialized. It's not like EVM with some marginal improvements, right? So I'm also talking, like Will2Bit, we're also talking with a lot of DeFi protocols, and given the recent hacks, a lot of DeFi protocols are deciding to wind down a lot of their tokens or applications on the L2s just to the risk, right? Because you get a lot of, you had a lot of technical dependencies and risk when moving to a lot of chains, right? And a lot of them are just moving back to Ethereum. So what I'm asking you is, how much customization do you think is you need to be competitive with Ethereum, like to be useful compared to Ethereum, given also the risk that applications add when they use something else other than Ethereum? Does that make sense?
I'll start. Like I have one more clear case, which is kind of this, or two cases. One is just, again, independence. Let's say imagine that in the bright future, like SpaceX IPO is exactly like on chain, right? Only on Ethereum. And then this kind of event, if Ethereum is the global finance, will basically stall every other finance everywhere. So being able to not be a victim of somebody else's success is still a good case of like isolated chains for sure. And again, L2s as well. Another one is purely, I don't know how it's going to be relevant in the future or not, but there's like a lot of laws in some countries where, okay, we cannot leave this data to another country. Like we cannot post it like as a blob on Ethereum because then, I don't know, some sanctioned country can download this blob and then we are in trouble, right? So we need to keep it like completely isolated geographically. So this is definitely also the use case I see. And of course, like privacy and I would say role-based access controls on chains on this L2s is also something interesting and important because let's say a big organization, again, an enterprise, they are doing the thing like they're working with AWS. And AWS, for example, their engineer can like deploy things, and then their auditors or they like a financial auditor, they can, for example, create like entries in the databases, but they cannot change the database. Right now, even if they have a private chain, basically that means that their engineers can tamper with like financial records. So there is no differentiator of like who does what. So this is also one more case where, again, it goes together with privacy because role-based access control is kind of there for L2s as well. But I'm more talking about like this kind of L2s that enterprises probably will be using and not some chains like Adstack or something like this.
Yeah, I would argue again that the base tech is going to get more and more commoditized and that there's going to be more like people trying out new tech, and I think that's maybe what Vitalik means as well, that like these hyper-specialized use cases where people say, hey, let's try that. If it works out, then we probably find a way to integrate that into the base stack of Ethereum. No, I wanted to make one point, but I forgot what I wanted to. On Celo. So like Celo had this like payment with like ERC stablecoin since the beginning, and I mean, by now, like technically, it costs us a lot of work because we learned a lot in the last 6 years. But now the work is ongoing. Like people find that feature interesting, and there's a lot of proposals and EIPs to integrate that at like Ethereum level, basically. And that's really nice to see because there's the need, but the approach.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's nice for Ethereum, but is it nice for Celo?
I think there's pros and cons. Of course, it's our niche, and if other chains have that integrated, it's probably from the business side not so nice. For the tech, definitely. I mean, we would love to not need to maintain our diff based on the Optimism stack. So given that, I think like tech is going to be more commoditized, and it's going to be more of a business problem to find like a use case where you can say, hey, it makes sense to have our own L2 and to have the freedom to try out new technical things and integrate that nicely with the stack and the users.
Good answers, guys. I really think that there is a constant dialectic that we are engaged in, which is between the L1 and the L2s. Which is the L1 by necessity, as you very much indicated, has to be a place of supreme security. It is the security guarantor. And to be that role, one has to be, by necessity, a lot slower, a lot more deliberate, a lot more intentioned. Everything has to operate at a different cadence than anything else can operate it at. And so given that, I actually think that we could go into the exercise of trying to understand what are the specializations in June 2026 that we need to make sure we pivot for on the L2 space. And I think the ones you mentioned that Vitalik mentioned yesterday are pretty much on point, right? But at the same time, what will be the specializations that need to happen in June of 2027, in June of 2028, in June of 2029? And it is never going to be the case. Maybe it will be, and we'll watch this later, and you know, we'll make fun of me. But it'll never be the case that we'll never be in a world where we don't need to continually adapt and provide customizations, opinionated decisions, et cetera. Just to kind of underscore one that Igor, you mentioned, which is the rules-based access controls, RBAC, and things like that. That is very important at an enterprise level. At a large enterprise level, that is essential. That's part of the way that they compose their stack now across everything. You know, that's the way they instrument all their services now. So to not be able to instrument that at the block space level is impossible. But to put that into the L1 in any scope would be absolutely in violation of the core principles of Ethereum. So how do you do that in a way that balances between the principles and the pragmatism? How do you make sure that that happens and allows block space to grow and thrive while also not compromising the orbiting spaceship of it all, like the thing that we're all rooted in? And I don't think that's going to ever happen. And again, maybe come back and be like, Ben, haha, you were so wrong. But I don't think that will ever happen on the L1 Ethereum space. But I think there is room for that to happen in L2s, just as one example.
Okay, so last question. We have less than 5 minutes. So I hear a lot about these, enterprise chains, right? These institutions coming on chain and maybe wanting to build their own chain. This is something very big in Arbitrum, right? That is trying to, with the Arbitrum stack, to build a lot of for institutions. So a lot of times, people justify using an L2 because you can get very nice properties, right? Like it's not the space is not black and white, right? You can be very trust minimized, very censorship resistant, and so on. You can be fully centralized, fully controlled by an entity, but you can also be something in the middle, in the sense of you can provide some guarantees, like if you have ZK proofs, you can prove that the state is correct, even though, for example, you're upgradable. If you have a forced transaction mechanism, you can get some kind of censorship resistance, right? But given all the chains that are coming out, like enterprise chains, decentralized chains that we see and review on Altobit, I feel like none of them is actually interested in being something in the middle. Like all of these chains, those enterprise institutional chains that I see, they just are fully centralized, right? So my question is, do you see from your perspective, like actually this willingness to be like centralized, yes, but with some additional guarantees, or it's just, we just want to have something fully centralized that looks like a blockchain?
I love your questions. They're always so well stated. I do think that is part of the responsibility of the institution to make sure that your consumers are doing the best they can within the constraints that they're working within. And I know that's like a lot of words, but basically what that means is that, for example, if I am a solutions engineer at AWS, right, and my job is to onboard a new customer to AWS, I want to make sure that they are AWS-ic, like Pythonic, AWS-ic. I want to make sure that they are like within the purview, the walls of AWS. And I think it's the same exact thing when a block space is onboarding a new institution into Ethereum. It is part of the responsibility of that blockchain that's part of Ethereum, part of the world of Ethereum, to make sure that that consumer, within the constraints that it operates in, does to its best ability work within, Ethereumonic, I just invented that, Ethereumonic kind of constraints. And every example, you're going to find it being more or less so, and more or less challenging, more or less, because we're all human, and companies have different incentivizations and different motivations, and some do more, some do less. I think you actually have a very good balcony perspective on this from where you sit. But from where I sit, kind of much lower on the ground, I see institutions that I'm working with, like the engineering teams. I'm not working with the business teams, I'm working with the engineering teams, and the engineering teams very much want to do this. They very much want to do this, and they're very excited about it. And I don't know about the business teams. I have no idea. Maybe they're not. Maybe they are. I have no idea. But the engineering teams that I'm working with, the institutions, as part of my work at Arbitrum, they are very excited about it. And that keeps me motivated. I can't talk about anything else, though.
Yeah, and to add to this also, that's, again, for what we've seen, yes, coming from more like ZK perspective, that's two big things on the proving side that were always a big kind of issues for like businesses were, of course, the speed and the cost of proofs, because ZK proofs are not cheap or were not fast, especially if you look like at a few years ago. Again, but with the teams and the progress in the space and the teams like in here like Zisk and some others who are kind of both making real-time proving possible and also practical, like for the chains. They're also, of course, willing to do that because for them it's also extra security guarantees for their chain, and extra security is always kind of good.
Yeah, I think as usual there's like trade-offs involved, and I would agree with Ben that the technical teams, I think they're usually interested in having nice properties, and yeah, it's really helpful to have L2Beat to actually follow and like check on those. But yeah, there's usually other priorities as well. So I think for users, unfortunately, it's usually not the highest priority to have like nice security guarantees in edge cases. So people care more about yeah, cheap transactions, faster finality, and so on. So as an engineering team, I think usually, yeah, one has these trade-offs and has to navigate and see like, okay, what are the users requesting? How can we make lives easier? And yeah, I feel unfortunately sometimes this goes at the expense of some security properties.
Okay, we're out of time, so thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for great questions.